This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Okay. We're recording. We are going. Hello. Hello, Death by Southwest. I am late, as always, to getting this Tuesday episode recorded. It's Tuesday at 6:18 p.m., and I'm just sitting down to record by myself. Mark offered to do it with me tonight, but he, didn't get home till late and felt like I really just didn't want to drive over there, to be honest. So unfortunately for you guys, you get just me again. However, I do have another episode written, and I think I'm going to go record that with him tomorrow. So that'll either be next week's, or maybe I'll make it an extra one this week. Who knows? You never know what you're going to get here at Death by Southwest. One host, two hosts, a Monday episode, a Tuesday, maybe a Wednesday. Never know. Which must be incredibly annoying for everyone who actually regularly listens and enjoys listening. That must be irritating. So, apologies. You know what? Actually, my therapist told me today that I perhaps apologize too much. So I think Jenna's actually told me that too on here. So I take it back. I take the apology back. For those on Patreon or maybe YouTube, I used to put, when I do it on video, I used to put the first 20 minutes on YouTube and then the full thing on Patreon. And that's what this very brilliant digital marketer that I used to work with, Evan, used to tell me, it's just a good way to push people to Patreon. But I don't think that many people are watching on YouTube anyways. And I haven't been putting them on YouTube. I already said this to Patreon because I have not been showering for these, certainly not doing my hair, not doing my makeup, and just going into it kind of gross. But how rude of me to just put the grossness on Patreon and not spread it around to YouTube. So maybe I will. Who knows? Again, I'm a real game time decision type person these days. I do have a glass of wine, which I really don't drink during the week, but I don't know. It felt fun-ish. Who knows? It's been a good day. It's been a day. Did a bunch of work for Jim and that podcast, and did some Teachers Pay Teachers work. I'm really going to try to amp that up. So if there are any teachers out there who use Teachers Pay Teachers, send me your, if you have a storefront on there, send me your name and I'll follow you. That's it. Look, guys, you can kind of see my murder board that I'm working on back there. What? I don't know. I have 18 different ideas for different podcasts and money-making things going on in my brain, and we're just going to try all of them and see what shakes out, what sticks to the wall, as they say. Whoa, my computer's super bright right now. Let's see. I'm not going to do too much of a chit-chat at the beginning because I chit-chatted yesterday about I don't even know what. I will say it's the Olympics, which I don't care at all. I know that sounds harsh, but I do not care at all. I've never really been an Olympics watcher. I happened to, on Friday when they started, go by my only friend here's house, just say hi and have a coffee with her because it was my birthday. And she had it on. She had the opening, I guess it's the opening games. They were all, every country had a boat and was riding down. Oh, I'm going to sound like a real asshole idiot right now. The Seine, I think, in Paris, where it takes place. meh. It just does not interest me really. When I was younger, I think I used to like watching gymnastics. My friend, she said she really enjoys the surfing, which apparently takes place in Tahiti. That sounds cool, but like I need another thing to watch right now. There's actually not that much TV on, but I'm up to my eyeballs in Criminal Minds. So, oh yeah, I do have it. Here's my little, for those watching, my little Criminal Minds, where I said I take notes during it. There's my Criminal Minds notebook. I have so many little notebooks around. It's crazy. It's just not, I don't know. Basketball, but basketball is also the only sport that I enjoy watching, period, really. So, yeah, I'd watch basketball, but otherwise, it's a no for me. Is anybody else really into it? And if so, please explain it to me, like why it's so exciting. That was a real brief segment on the Olympics. What else did I have to mention? I've recommended it before, I believe, but if anybody is looking for something to watch, Presumed Innocent on Apple with Jake Gyllenhaal, who is one of my favorites. It's a great show, and I just watched the season finale last week, and wow. I feel like it's come out too recently that I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, so I won't talk about the ending. I will just say that I find often with most TV shows, especially like the limited series thriller type TV shows, I'm disappointed by the endings. I don't really like the endings of most shows. Like I think I recently, but yeah, I kind of recently rewatched The Good Wife, all of the seasons, but I didn't watch the last 2 episodes because it just A, makes me kind of sad to finish a show, and B, they're just usually disappointing. So I didn't watch it. But this does not disappoint. Even Mark, who is very, very arrogantly believes that he can guess the outcome of any TV show, which he actually is quite good at guessing. Even he was like blown away. It was really good. So highly, highly recommend. Apple has a lot of great shows. And I think that's really all that I have for chit-chatting. I'm feeling antsy and uncomfortable. So I'm going to get into the episode because I find it really hard to record when I'm just looking directly at myself and I look like this. But so when I'm recording, I'm looking at my notes and I can't see myself, unfortunately, or fortunately for all the rest of you. I feel like podcasting on video is very popular, but like I wouldn't watch this. I wouldn't watch me. If it was me and Jenna, maybe, or if it was me and me and another person, maybe. Or if I was famous or like, very like dolled up and then also had pictures of what I was talking about coming up, that I guess would be maybe worth it. I don't know why I'm trying to discourage people from watching the podcast. Oh, I know what I wanted to also say. And then I promise I'm getting right into the episode. Don't worry, all you people who hate the intro, which there are many. I don't know how or why, but I'm grateful for it. So I think I mentioned yesterday in the bonus, I have a back itch, that Natalie is a new Patreon member, and she sent me a lovely email with some great kind of work suggestions. Monica, I just saw today, is a recent Patreon member. Jay is trying it out, free trial, trying it out. And then another, I'm guessing this is another podcast called Trial Watchers. They're trying it out. I think that's it. I noticed that sometimes Patreon is bad at updating. Oh, Jim joined as a free member. That was like 2 weeks ago. Anyways, I'm up and down with Patreon, like I am with Instagram, like I am with most things. Sometimes I'm really on top of it and adding content and stuff to, not, I don't want to disparage myself, but not that it's like groundbreaking content. It's usually the dogs, my house, my backyard, or my just rambling thoughts on my morning walks. But I did think I was going to maybe do a house tour soon on there. That'll convince you guys to join. Okay. Anyways, no, not okay. I'm going to backtrack there and say thank you and welcome to anybody who's trying out the Patreon. As I used to always say, if there are things that you would feel would make it more worthwhile for you, or that you would love to see or have or talk about, or anything, whatever you want. If you're one of the new or free trial Patreon people, or one of our, I don't want to say old, but like one of our original or long time patrons, please always tell me, I guess I'm going to say me for, it's kind of just me, myself, and I these days. But please tell me what I can offer that would please you on Patreon. Yeah. This red wine is making my, I usually drink white wine, but I don't have any. And this red wine is kind of making my mouth dry. Which is not ideal for podcasting. Although I did, when I was at Cavalry, one of my bosses always wanted me to try doing an ASMR podcast, and just doing kind of ASMR reading, actually. So like picking a favorite book and just reading it, but reading it like this, I think. I don't know. I don't think ASMR has to be whispering, but I feel like it's real close, talking to the microphone, which I could never listen to. It would super weird me out. But apparently people like it. And then I think it's also doing things like, oops. Does that even make any noise? I'm trying to scratch something across the microphone. I can't tell if that'll actually make noise or not. But, things like that, and just real close talking. I don't know. I think it'd be hard to like read an entire, well, certainly book, but multiple chapters of a book talking like that. But I did look on YouTube, and there are a lot of really popular ASMRs where people are just telling stories, close talking to their microphone. Who knows? And so the whole point of that is that I feel like a dry mouth with wine, that could be something interesting. Ew. Ugh. Okay. Moving right along, guys. So our story today takes place in Greeley, Colorado. I know we've had another one in Greeley, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. I haven't been doing a sense of place at all. However, got an Instagram message from a new Instagram follower the other day who is from England, I believe. And they said they really enjoy the sense of place because they don't know about these places. So I feel like there's a real happy medium where I can just give a brief sense of place when it's somewhere that's not like Las Vegas or, Dallas, I guess. So Greeley, Colorado is located in Weld County. It's about 50 miles north of Denver and 30 miles east of the Rocky Mountains. Typical Colorado climate. Summers are kind of hot. Winters are very cold. Lots of snow. The population is about 111 residents as of 2024. Apparently it's been growing steadily over the years. The University of Northern Colorado is there. JBS USA is one of the largest meat processing companies, and that also is located there. And it's named after Horace Greeley, a prominent editor of the New York Tribune, who famously promoted westward expansion with the phrase, "Go west, young man." They have a stampede, the Greeley Stampede, one of the largest 4th of July rodeos. Lots of parks and outdoor activities with the Rocky Mountains there. And that is your very under 2-minute Greeley breakdown. So now we're going to get into our story, which begins on February 10th, 2020, which was a Monday. Snow had just fallen. It was cold and wintry. And George Gray of 104 FM, who has been waking people up with his radio show for 20 years, was doing what he does every Monday, doing his radio show. And while George was waking up with the people of Greeley, someone else, whose name I do not have, but was a snowplow driver, was driving up Pooter. Sorry, guys. Pooter Canyon. It's just a weird word, but it's spelled Poudre. I'm already taking you out of the story, and we haven't even gotten into it. So somebody driving a snowplow was driving up this canyon and clearing the snow and saw smoke a little bit up the road off the side of a small hill. So he went up, pulled over to see what it was, and he saw this big log burning, which was weird because he's in a pretty remote area. This canyon's pretty remote. It's on the way into the Rocky Mountains. And he walked a little bit closer, took a few more steps, and he could see branches, and he could see a pair of boots sticking out of the branches. And he couldn't fully see a body, but he just knew in his gut. He had a feeling this is a crime scene. So he ran back to the snowplow and called 911. He said, I think there's a dead body. I'm pretty sure it's a body here. And waited for first responders, which took a minute. It took about 45 minutes to an hour, and he was sitting there just waiting. And when the first responders got there, they did find a male body with the legs, torso, arms. Most of the body was pretty badly burned at this point, buried under these sticks, branches, and log. There was no ID. They didn't know who it was, but they were quite certain that it was murder because this body was wrapped in a light blue blanket and plastic, and duct tape had been used to secure the plastic and the blanket around this male body. And when investigators looked a little bit closer, they could see that his neck had been slashed really deeply. I mean, they weren't fully examining him, obviously, but from what they could tell, it looked like this slash in his neck went almost all the way through. And one of the investigators said, this clearly wasn't a fight. This was we want you dead. And the question became, but who was it and why did someone want them dead? So later that day, in a town right near Greeley, a crowd was gathering to watch a live music performance with an Elvis impersonator band at the Candlelight Dinner Playhouse. It was a sold-out show, and this Elvis impersonator was none other than our radio host that I mentioned before, George Gray. So George and his band, George was the Elvis impersonator, and there was a full band with quite a few people that played with him. The band always met 30 minutes prior to any show that they were doing, so they could kind of get ready, gather, etc. And today, just like all other days, everyone was there 30 minutes early, except for the trumpet player, Scott Sessions. George thought this was a little bit weird because Scott was very dependable. He was always on time. It just wasn't like him. But George thought, okay, maybe he got caught up. So waited 15 minutes, and now it's 15 minutes until they go on. And George is nervous. Like, this is not Scott. So he starts calling him, and his phone, nope, not answering his phone. No one's answering his phone. And George just kind of knows, like, something's off. But he didn't really have a choice. The show, as they say, the show must go on. So the band and George went on without Scott and had a great show. George went home. And by the next day, when he still hadn't heard from Scott, When he finished his morning radio show, he called Scott's dad, Stan, and said, Stan, Scott didn't show up to the performance last night. And Stan was like, that's highly unusual. That's just not at all like Scott. And Stan, Scott's dad, was pretty immediately worried. So Stan and George decided to meet at Scott's house, and Stan had a key. So Stan let them in, and Stan started walking through the house, and no one was there, just the cat. So Stan decided that he was going to go ahead and report Scott missing. So he went to the police, reported him missing, told them, the last time I heard from him was Saturday night. It was, he called me when he was driving, and I was talking to him while he was driving. He said, yeah, Dad, I'm going to meet up with some friends in Fort Collins. Him and his dad were talking, and he said, okay, Dad, I actually just got here. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Stan had no idea who Scott was going to visit, and there was nothing weird about it. Okay, cool. You're going to visit some friends. That's really all that Stan had to tell the police at this point. So police said, okay, we'll file the missing person report. Thanks for letting us know. And Stan went home to just kind of wait to hear something, hopefully. And he did. A few hours after he reported his son missing, he got a call to come back to the station. And they told Stan that they had found Scott, but they had actually found his body, and he was deceased. They identified him with his fingerprints, and they were pretty sure that he was murdered. An autopsy soon after this revealed that Scott's throat was slit with so much force that it did nearly decapitate him. One of the investigators, Justin Atwood, is quoted as saying, there was rage involved in it. It's an absolute horror that somebody could be treated that way and then disposed of in that way. No one deserves that. And Stan, Scott's father, felt the same way. He said, everyone loved Scott. He couldn't understand who would want to do this. And hearing those gruesome details about, being Scott's throat being slit with so much force and then his body being burned, it was, needless to say, very difficult for the family to hear these gruesome details. But it certainly, not that they needed it, but it certainly fueled them to want to find out who did this, and quickly. So police didn't have much to start with, but they did get Scott's cell phone data. And they felt that this was a good place to start because cell phone data does usually tell a story, and Scott's cell phone data was no different. So the Saturday before Scott's missed concert, when he was talking to his dad, Stan, turns out Scott didn't go to Fort Collins, where he had told his dad that he was. Instead, his phone, and presumably Scott as well, spent the entire night in Greeley, somewhere near a King Super grocery store. I've been to a King Super, actually, in Denver. They're, I think, like linked to Kroger, maybe. Anyway, so that's the last place that his phone kind of pinged, was near this King Super grocery store in Greeley. So police went to that grocery store and just decided to kind of comb the parking lot and the area around it, see if they could find anything. And they sure did. They pretty quickly found his vehicle in the King Super parking lot. The keys were still in the ignition. And strangely, one of the floor mats was actually outside underneath the vehicle. So the next step for them was to pull security footage so they could see, how did this car get here? Was it Scott who drove it here or someone else? And they pulled security footage from all the nearby businesses and scanned hours upon hours of video footage. And a lot of it was really blurry, grainy, a lot of, this was recently, this was in 2020, but even still, a lot of businesses don't have super high tech, up to date security footage. So it wasn't great. Plus it was winter. It had recently snowed. Things were frozen. So the footage was difficult, to say the least, to really depict anything useful from. But after hours of going through this footage, they did see something interesting that caught their eye. According to the time code on the video, on Tuesday morning, the 11th at 6:48 a.m., this is the day after Scott's body was found, they saw someone driving his car into the King Super parking lot, parking the car, getting out of the car and walking away towards the south out of the parking lot and then off of the, camera feed. Wine's making my mouth too dry, guys. I got to go back to water. So the video was so grainy, they certainly couldn't tell who it was. They could barely tell whether it was a man or a woman. But once from a certain angle, they were pretty sure it was a man. But that's all they knew. So they decided that in order to really go any further in this investigation, they needed to know more about Scott. And it was interesting. I saw that one investigator said, look, no one is perfect. And it's often that you can learn a lot about somebody when you look at their imperfections and see if that kind of pulls at any strings or leads you anywhere. So that's what they were looking for. Not that they were trying to, not speak ill of. I'm not going to find the right word right now, but disparage. Have I used that word twice in this podcast already? Not that they were trying to disparage the deceased, but they thought it could help with the investigation. So they started looking into Scott's past, see if he had a record, anything like that. And it turns out that he did have a few things against him. 2 years prior to this, it turned out that Scott's anger had gotten the better of him and he had a fight with his ex-girlfriend. And she had gotten an order of protection against him. Her name was Loretta Bolick. So, of course, they wanted to talk to Loretta. It turns out she lived very close to the King Super parking lot. Her home was actually about 200 feet from the cell tower that Scott's phone pinged off of that Saturday night. She was open when she spoke to them. She said, we had a very up and down relationship. In fact, oops, sorry guys, those are my feet situating on the bar under my desk. So she said when they fought. And in one fight in particular, Scott threw a coffee cup at her and she asked him to leave. And then she called the police and reported him and he was arrested. And she said that even though they broke up after that, they remained good friends, really good friends, actually. She played for them. She had a voicemail from him from that Friday night, less than 24 hours before he was presumed to be killed. It was a pretty innocuous message, just him calling, saying, hi, hope everything's going well. Talk to you soon. And she actually she told police she didn't learn about Scott's death until Wednesday. And when they asked her, why, if you were such good friends, how could you not have, been told about this or informed about this? And she said, because I was offline. She said that she had called in sick to work on Monday and Tuesday. I said, oh, were you sick? Are you okay? She said, I wasn't sick exactly. I was feeling emotionally heavy. Something just felt off. I don't know why, but I called in sick to work, which they found kind of odd at first. Okay, his ex, she's had him arrested. And then she called in sick to work, but she wasn't really sick. They kept talking to her though. And as they continued to talk to her and she continued to be very forthcoming and open, they saw real genuine concern and grief and sadness for the loss of Scott. And so much so that in their minds, she was not a viable suspect. I believe she also had an alibi. During this interview, though, with Loretta, one of the investigators got a message. And so they quickly wrapped up the interview and headed over to Scott's home because the message let the investigator know that the sheriff's office had gotten a warrant to search Scott's home. And and several of the sheriffs were in there, and they'd found a list of all of Scott's passwords to like every account he has on this one piece of paper where he had all of his accounts, all the passwords written down and on his countertop, just sitting right there, which initially sounds foolish to me. But we'll see how that ends up for Scott. So this allowed them to obviously log into all of Scott's accounts and start kind of pouring through them. And one of those accounts was his Facebook account. And that proved to be pretty useful because they found some very private messages between Scott and another woman. And it was not his ex, Loretta. It was someone new, a young woman by the name of Heather Frank. So they looked up Heather's address, and they found that she also happened to live right next to the King Super, like Loretta. And while they did want to talk to her, they also wanted to make sure that they were fully prepared to interview her. And in order to be fully prepared to interview her, they needed to learn more about her. So who was Heather Frank? Heather Frank was a divorced mom of 3 adult sons. She was described by friends as warm and bubbly. She was very stylish, always perfectly made up, perfectly coiffed, very put together. She was a waitress at Doug's Diner. And Doug's Diner, for Greeley, a lot of people kind of thought of it like Cheers. Like, I'm aging myself here, but like the TV show Cheers, like the friendly local bar, everybody knows your name. One of the waitresses said, we do know everybody's name. Half of the customers at least are regulars. We know their orders by heart. One of the waitresses there was named Shelby, and she worked with Heather. And when police went to speak with her, and she had nothing but glowing things to say about Heather. She said Heather was kind of her mentor. She was such a sweet, kind, good person. She also told police that Heather had recently broken up with a boyfriend and was getting back out there and dating. She was going to concerts, and Shelby thought that Heather had met someone special that she was spending time with, but she didn't know who it was. Heather hadn't shared that yet. Turns out it was Scott Sessions. They had met at one of his concerts, got to talking, and started dating. So we didn't really cover who Scott Sessions was either. So we're going to do that now. So Stan, Scott's dad, and his wife tried for many years to have children, but they never were able to. So they finally adopted Scott. And not too long after that, they adopted another Scott. Sorry, guys. Another son. And so they were a family of 4, a very happy family. Scott and his brother were good kids from what I read. Wasn't a ton on his childhood. Scott was 53 at the time of his death, so not a lot on his childhood. But I did find an interesting story. When Scott was 25, he tracked down his biological mother. It was an open adoption, so he was able to look up his biological parents, and he found out that he had a half-sister, Allison Weldon, who lived in Kansas. And I saw an interview with Allison when she was when Allison was younger. She used to blurt out. This is before she ever knew about Scott. She would blurt out that she had a brother, and she didn't have a brother at this point in her life. She didn't know that she had a brother. She had a sister. So when she was little, she would always say like, "I have a brother. I have a brother," and her parents would be like, "No, you don't. You have a sister. That's it." And then when when Allison was 15, her mother gave her the news. She said, "You actually do have a brother. I gave your brother up for adoption years before. I was very young at the time of his birth. And your brother's dad, who was a musician, had just disappeared. My family was strict Mormons, and you didn't come home pregnant. So Scott's biological mother gave him up for adoption. So once Scott was 25 and got the information about his biological family, he called Allison, And Allison said when she picked up the phone, he just said like, "Hey sis, I guess I'm your brother." She said that they automatically clicked, even though they really only spent time in person a handful of times over the years. They really regularly and frequently communicated via phone and messages. They bonded over their love of cats and a band whose members apparently dressed as mummies. They commiserated over failed relationships, and they just had a lot in common. Allison said, quote, "He'd sing on the phone to me or take pictures of himself making funny faces in the mirror, and we'd just start laughing. We found a way to calm each other down when it seemed like the rest of the world didn't understand." So beyond that story about Scott and his family, or families, I should say, he was a trumpet player. He had a deep love of music. He played the trumpet in 2 local bands, the Elvis Presley cover group, George Gray and the Elvis Experience, and a high-energy rhythm and blues act, the Movers and Shakers. Allison said, quote, "It didn't matter if Scott was sad or happy or depressed. When he played that trumpet, it was a whole other thing. He was full of life down to his feet, his fingertips. He was just full of life." And one of his band members described him as being so talented as a musician, had a remarkable memory and an ear that could easily discern the key elements of any song. To pay his bills, Scott actually painted houses, but his dream was to earn enough money from his music to quit painting houses and just do music full time. And in 2019, it kind of felt like he was making progress on this. The Colorado Blues Society selected the Movers and Shakers horn section, which included Scott, for its Member Choice Awards. And in January of 2020, the band made it to the semifinals at the International Blues Competition in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a huge event that featured acts from around the world. So, and that was unfortunately the month before Scott was killed. So it seemed like his dreams of being a full-time musician were just getting off the ground. And when he was killed, sadly. So that is a little bit more about Scott. And Heather, the woman who he, according to his Facebook messaging account, was recently starting to date. And so police were talking to Shelby, the other waitress at the diner where Heather worked. But Shelby, again, didn't know specifically who Scott was. So what she couldn't tell them about Scott and Heather, the police were able to kind of glean through Scott's Facebook. It was apparent that they had a budding relationship. And that Saturday, before Scott was found on the following Monday, they found a chain of messages between Heather and Scott that happened on that particular Saturday. At 5:13 p.m., Heather said, "Want to come over?" And Scott said, "Sure, I just need to hop in the shower. Sound groovy? ? And Heather said, ... hurry! ! There's a pause in the messages while Scott was obviously showering. And then Scott texted, "I'm on my way over," with 3 smiley faces. And then he texted again and said, "Warning, I smell pretty amazing." I have to be honest, from just these 3 text messages from Scott, I already adore this man. Sound groovy. And then at 7:59 p.m., Heather texted, "Hey, where are you at?" So investigators were obviously examining all of the messages on Scott's social media accounts. But when they looked at these particular messages on that Saturday, the last Saturday that he was ever heard from, they just felt that they were different than all the previous exchanges between Heather and Scott. Like something was off a little bit. The messages from Heather just felt kind of cold. They didn't really know what to make of it yet, though, and they didn't know enough about Scott or Heather to know if they were correct in this kind of observation. So beyond these messages, there was not much else on Scott's phone from that night, except for, of course, that it proved that he was not in Fort Collins. He was in Greeley, and that he traveled over to Heather's house. And they also were able to determine that his phone had either died or been shut off while he was there, because there was no more activity beyond that night. Early the next morning, actually at 3:21 a.m. on Sunday, Heather texted her boss and said, "I've been up all night throwing up. I'm not going to make it into work today." And then on Monday, Heather did show up at work, but Shelby said she was different. Something was off. She was quieter. She was less bubbly. She didn't really look like herself. She didn't have her makeup done, her hair done. She looked just out of it. And Shelby at the time didn't really think anything of it because Heather had been sick the day before. So Shelby thought, she was sick. It's okay. All of this was just peculiar to the investigators. It just felt a little off. Something here was off. And I mean, they're investigating a murder, so something is off. They don't know who's involved yet. So they decide they're going to go over to Heather's place and keep an eye on her place, since she was the last one to see Scott alive. Now, keep in mind, they have not spoken to Heather, really. Not really. Not at all. They haven't spoken to Heather because they want to get a better sense of who she is, who she was to Scott, all of it. So this investigator is just kind of sitting on Heather's street. She lives in an apartment complex in a cul-de-sac. And he's sitting there just watching. And he noticed a Subaru car parked. A Subaru car? A Subaru is a car. So he noticed a Subaru parked in the cul-de-sac right next to the apartment complex where Heather lived. And it caught his eye because there was a lot of red dirt caked on the sides of this car, which maybe doesn't seem like a big deal, but red dirt like that, especially if you're from the Southwest, I don't know if it's in other places, but definitely the Southwest, oftentimes red dirt is up in the mountains. It's when you get to the more rural areas. Certainly that's the case here in Arizona and apparently in Colorado as well. And that's why this caught his eye, because the red dirt kind of all over the sides of this Subaru looked a lot like the dirt on those mountain roads up where they found Scott's body. They also noticed some damage to the front of the car, which, didn't necessarily mean anything, but he's investigating a murder, so he's just observing everything. And he thought, well, I'm sitting here. He called in the plate numbers. And it turned out that Subaru belonged to a guy named Kevin Eastman, who happened to be Heather Frank's ex-boyfriend, who had worked in Colorado's oil fields for years and been dating Heather on and off for 5 years. So the investigator was like, well, why is his car here? Because Heather was dating Scott. It just all seemed slightly questionable. Nothing was pointing them in any which direction yet. But they're investigating. So they pull the cell phone data for Heather and Kevin's phones. And while they are pulling this data, Stan, Scott's dad, was tasked with going to tell his wife of 58 years what had happened to her son. She lived in a nursing home, and I guess Stan did not. This struck me as kind of odd. It has nothing to do with the murder, but just odd in general. I don't know. If you're married for 58 years, wouldn't you want to live in the nursing home with your partner? I can't imagine being with somebody for 58 years. I can't imagine living 58 years. Well, I can. I'm not that far off from there, and being with one person that whole time, don't you want to go be with them? Not a judgment. Sounds like a judgment, doesn't it? More just a pondering. I guess I'll let you know if I'm ever with somebody for 58 years. I don't think I will be, because I don't think I'll live that long. Anyways, not the place actually to be joking, because it's sad. He had to tell her that Scott had been murdered. And he said that she just got kind of this faraway look in her eyes. And all she said is, who would want to murder my son? And as it turned out, police thought that they might have an answer to that question now, because they had that cell phone data. And the cell phone data showed that Heather Frank and Kevin Eastman's, and Scott's cell phones were all in very close proximity in the same place for about 12 hours on Saturday night. And that was Heather's place. All of their phones were, and I actually don't know how precise, because again, this was 2020, so this is current. How precise can cell phone data show? Like, can it show that I am in this house? I know that if you get on my phone, you can, like, I have, there are apps. I'm sure there's a billion apps that are tracking my location right now. So I guess if you had my phone in your hand, I think you could see exactly where I was or had been. But the police don't. They're just pulling data from the cell phone company of like where the phones were pinging. So I wonder how precise that is. Apparently it was precise enough that police were able to determine that Heather, Kevin, and Scott were in the same place for hours that Saturday night. And then Scott's cell phone, remember, either was turned off or died. And then in the early morning hours of Sunday, Heather's cell phone and Kevin's cell phone show them traveling on roads in Greeley, heading towards Poudre Canyon for nearly 2 hours. And then as they get close to the canyon, they lose reception. So investigators are like, great, well, we're not going to know exactly where they went. So they headed up to the canyon, traveling the same route that the cell phones showed Heather and Kevin traveling. And they were able to find a few businesses along the way and pull surveillance footage. And one of those surveillance footages, that's not the right way to say that, sorry, shows a Subaru that looks a lot like Kevin's Subaru traveling towards Poudre Canyon. Now, they couldn't see the license plate, so they couldn't 100% say this is Kevin's cell phone. But Kevin's car, sorry. But Kevin and Heather are traveling. Their cell phones are showing them traveling on this road. And then surveillance footage shows a Subaru that looks very much like Kevin's traveling on this road at the same time with damage to the front end of it. And then within 3 hours, the surveillance footage and the cell phones show that Heather and Kevin and that Subaru. Now, again, we don't know that Heather and Kevin are in it. Their cell phones are traveling on that road, and this Subaru is traveling on that road, headed back to Greeley. Cell phone records also showed that Kevin and Heather went back to her apartment after leaving the canyon. So, yes, they can't see the license plate, so they can't, without a shadow of doubt, say 100% it's Kevin's car. But between the car and the surveillance footage and the cell phones, they now strongly believe that Heather and Kevin are responsible for Scott's murder. However, they still want some more concrete evidence, or at least just evidence, not even concrete, just more evidence before they interview Heather and Kevin, because they really want to be able to go in knowing what they're talking about, not just thinking that Heather and Kevin murdered Scott. So police decided to dig into Kevin's past a little bit, and they found that Kevin had a bit of a rap sheet. He had been arrested for assault, weapons possession, and driving while impaired, and he had pled guilty in 2015 to a misdemeanor assault against Heather. They still wanted more, though. This still just wasn't enough to them. So they decided to install hidden cameras on Heather's street, and they secretly placed GPA trackers on Heather and Kevin's car, which, I don't know, I feel like they were already getting so much information just from the information from the cell phone provider. Like, that showed Heather and Kevin traveling up this road, traveling back down this road to the canyon. But I guess the GPA trackers provides much more specific information. So they're monitoring the cameras, monitoring the trackers. And the next day, later in the next day, one of the detectives is watching the live stream from the camera on Heather's street. He's at the station on his computer watching it. And he sees the two of them leave her residence and get into Kevin's car. So they're leaving Heather's and getting into Kevin's car. And so now he starts looking at the GPS tracker. Heather and Kevin travel to a farm in Weld County, about 45 minutes out into the country. They have no idea what the connection with this farm is. Like, is it one of their family member? Who knows? They have no idea. So this detective's like, well, I'm going to drive out there, see what's out there. Fortunately, by the time he got there, it was dark and he couldn't see Kevin's car. He couldn't see Heather. He couldn't see Kevin, and he was frustrated that he had made that whole drive and really nothing came of it. And he didn't have any reason to like go on to the farm property and ask questions. Like they're all just still investigating at this point. So he was like frustrated, but said, okay, fine, I'm going to go home and rest. And this was the night that all of the investigators, it was about 5 days that they had pretty much been investigating this Scott's murder nonstop, like really hadn't been home, hadn't stopped. So all of them decided, you know what? We need a night to rest. So they all went home, see their families, get a good night's sleep, and get back at it the next morning. Fortunately, when they woke up, they found some troubling information on the GPS tracker from the night before when they all decided to sleep. While they had all gone home that night, no one was kind of watching the cameras or the GPS trackers. Turns out that Kevin's car, which had been at the farm, left the farm, cruised around all over the countryside throughout the night. Stopped here at 3 a.m., then went on, drove further, stopped here at 4 a.m., went on, drove further, stopped somewhere else at 5 a.m. And as detectives are kind of reviewing this GPS information, they're like, shit, he's dumping evidence. He's just going to all these random places and dumping evidence. And yeah, they can see about with the GPS tracker, like where he stopped. I think pretty specifically they can see where he stopped, but like it's wilderness. It's snowing. Did he bury it? Did he throw it? You know, who knows? So the detective Detective Robbins, who had been out at the farm the previous day and then gone home, he was like, all right, I got to get back out there because once again, Kevin's car is showing on the GPS tracker that it is at the farm. Robbins is like, I don't know what I can do, but I got to get out there. So as he drove out there again, and as he's approaching, he sees smoke coming from the farm, and he's driving a little closer, not on the property, but trying to see what he can see. And he sees Kevin Eastman standing by what he could only describe as a burn pile, a big pile of stuff that was burning. And he was thinking, like, what is he burning now? But he couldn't see. He was too far away. Then Kevin turns, walks, gets in his car, and he's once again on the move. So Robbins is like, all right, well, I'm just going to follow him. So he follows him to a nearby gas station. Kevin exits his car and gets a gas can out of his car and goes up to the pump and is trying to pump gas into this gas can. And the detective Robbins is just sitting there watching this like, great, he's going to take this gas, go back to the farm and burn a bigger fire, make a bigger fire and burn the rest of the evidence. And he's like, all right. He's like, I don't have time. I don't have time to try and call somebody and get approval or this or that. I don't want to risk losing more evidence. I'm arresting him. So he walks up to Kevin and arrests him. Brings him into the station. And at the station, Kevin waived his rights. He said, yeah, I'll talk to you guys. He was kind of timid and almost gentle, which they weren't expecting. They said he wasn't really acting like your average suspect. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with Scott's murder. But detectives didn't just only want to talk about Scott. They want to talk about Heather because they wanted to talk to Heather and she wasn't with him. So they started asking him, like, where, did she flee? We know that you two were involved in this. So is she in hiding? And Kevin was like, I don't, she's probably at work. And they said, no, she's not at work. And he said, I don't know then. He did tell them that Heather was the love of his life and that he'd asked her to marry him 3 or 4 times recently also, but she'd always said no. And detective said, okay, well, we know you were with Heather Saturday night. We also know you were with Scott based on all the cell phone data. You 3 were together. And Kevin just says, I don't remember anything. Then they show him photos of his Subaru traveling up the mountains to the same area where Scott's body was found. And he says nothing. And the detective's like, you think this is a coincidence? Like, you were with this man the last time he was ever seen. And then we have footage of your car the next morning driving up to a pretty remote area where his body was found. Kevin says nothing. They said, we want to read you some messages between Heather and Scott. And Kevin, I saw this interview. Kevin immediately is like a child. He sticks his fingers in his ears and he's like, no, please, no. I don't want to hear any of it. No. I feel sick. And they're like, oh my God, okay. So they take a break. And Kevin gets down on the ground facing the corner of the little room where they're questioning him. And he starts praying to God. And they're there. They can hear him. He's praying to God, please, God, let me help them with this investigation. Please, God, keep Heather safe. They're waiting for Kevin to like finish praying so they can keep questioning him. And then one of the investigators gets a message. And that message, sorry, can you guys hear that when I'm drinking water? I'm sorry if you can. Anyways, that message that the investigator got while they're there interviewing Kevin was that they had found Heather dead. She had been found with 2 bullet wounds to her chest, wrapped in plastic, and her body was hidden under some lumber at that farm. So the detective now says to Kevin, okay, Kevin, Heather's dead. You know she's dead. Scott's dead. And Kevin says, Heather can't be dead. And police officer says, you need to start talking to us. But Kevin wouldn't. He just kept saying Heather can't be dead. I don't know what you guys are talking about. And finally, police officer says, okay, Kevin, you're under arrest. You're gonna change into some jail clothing. We're gonna take some photos of you. They charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. It turns out that Heather hadn't just had a few like mishaps with Kevin over the years. It turns out that she had been physically and emotionally abused by Kevin for years. They came across some video footage from 2019, so just about a year prior, that a police officer was taking where she's lying in a hospital bed and crying and saying, this isn't the first time he's done this to me. He had punched her multiple times in the ribs, so much so that she had to go to the hospital. Another time he had held a knife to her throat and threatened to kill her. This generally happened when she tried to break up with him. And she tried to break up with him a lot over 5 years, apparently, and never was able to seemingly shake him. She told Shelby, the other waitress at the diner, that he had beat her numerous times and she just couldn't get rid of him. And police believe that Kevin simply couldn't allow Heather to move on without him. That Kevin was kind of like, if she's not going to be with me, she's certainly not going to be with anyone else. And that's why he killed Scott in a jealous rage. They think that it was Kevin, not Heather, who sent those messages to Scott, like luring him over to Heather's house to be killed. They found once they were able to then go to Heather's home to investigate, they found a large blood stain behind Heather's front door. So they imagined that Kevin probably hid behind the door, waited for Scott to come to the door and walk in, and then slashed his throat. And Scott never saw it coming. They don't know. They didn't know and never really will know if Heather was actually part of it or not. Like if she knew what Kevin was planning to do, or if Kevin had shown up at her house and kind of held her hostage there and forced her to give him her phone so that he could message Scott. That seems more likely to me because she really liked Scott. Like they were just getting started and they seemed to really, really like each other. So it doesn't really, and she didn't like Kevin. So it doesn't make sense that she had anything to do with it. Either way, the detectives were pretty certain that she was killed that one night, that kind of fifth night that detectives decided we've been up for like 4 or 5 days. We got to go home and get some rest. They think that that's the night she was killed. And in an interview with one of the detectives, I saw Keith Morrison asked him, like, do you feel bad about that? Like knowing that the night you guys all chose to go get some sleep, she was killed. And I thought he handled the response. I thought his response was really, really perfect. It was like, we didn't kill Heather. That was someone else. But yes, there's not a day that goes by where I don't think, man, what if we just had done something differently? What could we have done differently to have stopped that? Which they probably couldn't have. At that point, they didn't have enough to bring in Heather or Kevin. They were thinking Heather was involved in Scott's murder. They didn't have enough to bring them in at that point. So I think it probably couldn't have been stopped. But I also understand that they must have felt, pretty bad about that. Kevin pled not guilty and went to trial in June of 2022. His defense was that Heather killed Scott, and the man who owned the farm, which we never found out anything about, killed Heather. But luckily the jury was not buying this, and they found Kevin guilty of both murders and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. And recently, George Gray's band, the Elvis Impersonator Band, put on a memorial concert for Scott and for Heather. And on the stage, Scott's trumpet sat there on a stool on the stage, kind of in memory of him. Sadly, 2 months after Scott's death, his mom, his adopted mom, Linda, Stan's wife, passed away. But Stan did say that the last words they exchanged were about their son. And Stan said to her, "Honey, it's okay. You've lived a great life. You raised a good family. You can go now and see our Scotty." Well, it makes me choked up. Sad. Sad for Stan. Within 2 months, he lost his son and wife of 58 years. So, there was an article that I found after I had written this, and I didn't have time to add it to my notes, like where I write the episodes out. So maybe I'll share it in the show notes because it'll probably be annoying for me to go through it now. But it basically just talks about what happened to Scott's trumpet. His dad, Stanley, said that in the years that followed Scott's murder, he wasn't sure what to do with the horn. No one had really expressed interest in it, and so he thought maybe he would donate it. He didn't really have a plan for it. But earlier in 2023, Scott's biological half-sister learned that Stan might donate it, and she decided to call Stan up. And she said, look, I don't want it to go to someone that doesn't respect it. Can you promise me that it'll stay in the family? And he said, well, I can make that promise if, do you want it? And Allison said, she didn't think she deserved it. And that wasn't why she reached out. And that's what she told him. She said, I don't deserve it. I'm not reaching out to get it for myself. I just want to make sure it goes to the right home. And Stan said, I've had him for 54 years. It's your turn. And Stan had described it this way. He said, Allison basically got cheated out of knowing her brother until later in life. And she didn't want the trumpet to go to a secondhand store. It was, she was very gracious. So she flew to Colorado and got the trumpet from Stan and brought it back with her to Wichita. She said she's even considered taking lessons in her brother's honor. But she said that more likely she'll spotlight it in a large glass case with a few other of her brother's belongings, a Santa Claus hat, a Denver Broncos ticket from 1976, and his lanyard from the Memphis Blues competition. Sad. Nice though that, nice that she got to know him at all, got to know her brother at all. Really tragic though that they, all of it's tragic for Scott and for Heather. Her, sons now don't have a mother, and all because of jealousy. Love and jealousy, which is crazy how much those emotions can make people crazy. It's interesting. I want to talk about this with Mark tomorrow if we record another episode, but I've been watching a lot of Criminal Minds, and he's been forced to kind of watch it as well. And like 90% of the murders, and there's 17 seasons of this show. Each season has like 20 episodes, 22 episodes. So there are just no shortage of different types of murders, kidnappings, crimes, basically. Ooh, I'm having deja vu that I talked about this before. So if I did, I'm sorry. Turn the podcast off. It's over. But that most of the, like 90% of the crimes that they cover they talk about how they're sexually charged, how, a sexual sadist or stabbing is often, I have my Criminal Minds notebook right here, but that stabbing is often a replacement for sexual urges. Just, I don't know. I don't have anything specific in my notes right here. Yeah, except for that, is it true that so many murders are sexually charged and not like in the way like I want to have sex with this person, so I'm going to kill them, but feelings of sexual inadequacy, sexual trauma from your past. And I'm not going to be able to come up with all of them, but really like so many murders when they're discussing the crime and why it maybe was committed or who committed it, it all links back sexually. And then I'm thinking back to all of the episodes that we've done. I definitely talked about this on this podcast on a bonus or something. Sorry guys. Anyways, out of all the murders we've done, I feel like not none, but 90% of them have nothing to do. They're not at all related to being a sexual sadist or sexual trauma in the past, I don't feel like sex is really a huge part of most of the murders we talk about. So, because I find the show Criminal Minds, whether you love it, hate it, whatever, the idea of it, like getting into the mind of a criminal in order to help solve the crime is fascinating. And I do believe that a lot of the information that's on that show is accurate. But so I'm just curious. I guess I could just look it up. I haven't, but I will. That, are so many murders and crimes really like derived from or come from or based on whatever some type of sexual something. I feel like I'm not quite explaining that properly, but you guys are used to that by now. I should take a picture right now of this cat laying I like usually never work in my office because I like to work standing up. And I had a standing desk. I had a standing, like a thing that I put on top of the kitchen table that raises up, and it's my standing desk. I moved that a couple weeks ago, and I like really tried to make this gigantic desk and my little office feel officey, like I want to work in here. And I do. I like it. I accomplished that a little bit. And Kat loves it. So I'm going to take a picture now and just show you guys. Is this cat? Oop. I just put the camera right in my boobs, guys. Sorry. I should cut that. I'll do it. I'll just sign off now, guys. I think that this has run its course, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Once again, I will not be editing this episode, so if you heard me drinking, or stumbling over my words, when we first started, again, I had the luxury of a full-time job that this was part of. And so editing it, of course I'm going to edit it and add music. And I kind of miss doing that. I do think it really adds to the story to have some background music and stuff. And I'm sorry, but that is the most time consuming part. And I just cannot afford to be doing that right now. So you were getting just like raw, unedited, not elevated by music podcasting right now. And that's the best I can do at the moment. Hopefully that changes at some point and we can get back to a more highly produced version where you don't have to hear me sniffle or drink water. But if you're still listening, even though it is not really produced at all, thank you. And I appreciate you guys. And hopefully you're still getting entertained a little bit, even though it's just me. Yeah. I'm going to, like I said, hopefully record with Mark tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm going to keep saying it because I love getting your emails, your messages. I do need to do a solid, take a solid afternoon to respond to Instagram. If you message me on Instagram, I'll be totally honest, you're getting an audio message back. Voice dictate always ends up coming out wrong. And then I have to sit there and proofread it. And so, if you don't want a voice message back, then shoot me an email at deathbysouthwest@gmail.com. Because Instagram, it's straight up voice messages nowadays. So, yeah. I think that's all I got. Thank you for listening. Leave us a review, please. Try out our Patreon. Follow us on Instagram. I don't really do much on TikTok or Facebook with this anymore. But I'll get back to it at some point. For now, I'm just trying to get the stories out. So sorry this one is so late. And I hope everyone is having a wonderful week. And love you all very, very much. Thank you for continuing to listen and put up with the many ups and downs of this show. Okay. Bye, guys.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."